On this edition of Native Report, we learn about a Native American burial ground discovered during the construction of a bridge in northern Minnesota.
We travel to the Bois Forte Reservation to learn about a unique collaborative tribal-state relations training program.
And we interview Robert Sonny Peacock about his experiences during the Vietnam War. We also learn what we can do to lead healthier lives and hear from our elders on this edition of Native Report.
Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Blandin Foundation, and the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation.
Welcome to Native Report. I'm Ernie Stevens.
And I'm Rita Aspinwall. A Minnesota bridge construction project was put on hold due to the discovery of human remains in an area known to have Native American burial grounds. As a result of this find, the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation are now working cooperatively to resolve the issue.
Torrential rains caused a destructive flood in northern Minnesota during the summer of 2012. Roads and bridges were washed out, and streets were flooded, causing problems in many neighborhoods.
The bridge under Highway 23 is a small arch culvert, and it plugged up with woody vegetation. And there was so much woody vegetation that came down the stream that it filled the channel up for about 2 blocks upstream from the bridge. And it caused all the homes in the neighborhood upstream from the bridge to be flooded. The neighborhood was so concerned about the potential of that happening again that they really pushed hard on the city of Duluth and MnDOT to try to find a way to mitigate the flooding issue that they had.
Flash forward to the spring of 2017, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation began work on replacing the bridge. But that stopped with the discovery of human remains, possibly Native American.
The project started in the middle of May, and we did about a week and a half or 2 weeks of work, and we were notified by the Fond du Lac Cultural Resources Director that there was potential of a cemetery nearby our project. And so as soon as we were notified, we contacted our project personnel, and they stopped work on that portion of the project. Unfortunately, we had already impacted and did unknowingly, we had already impacted some graves and cultural resources.
This area of the river has high historical importance. On the far side of the river is where a native village once stood, and later a fur trading post was built directly across from it. The findings of the remains proved to be an emotional issue for many people.
It was a sacred site of our original village. The site was desecrated, and just with that point, I think that's what should be brought to not just the Native community, but to everybody, and say, we have a serious issue. What happened there is the rules and regulations that were supposed to be followed weren't followed. And now we're in a position of our ancestors and relatives being spread across the road. And I think I really don't need to elaborate. I think anybody can understand that piece.
I'm the Cultural Resource Director for the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. I oversee the protection of burial sites across the state of Minnesota under Minnesota Statute 307.08, which is commonly referred to as the Private Cemeteries Act. And it was towards the end of the afternoon on June 6th that there were partial remains that were discovered. I had myself identified them as probably being human bone. Just no easy way of looking at that, especially when I can see and identify is represented because it's a child. You don't do this work without it affecting you at some point or the other, you know. And when it's kids, it's the hardest. Being a father, being a grandfather, being a community member. And even though it's another band, it's another community, we're all related.
Whatever missteps were made, all sides see this as a teachable moment and as an opportunity for enhanced communications. Work on the bridge, once slated for completion by October 2017, will commence only when the site survey is complete.
We're working with Fond du Lac Band and Minnesota Indian Affairs Council to develop a plan, and the plan's going to have at least two parts, probably more. So the first part is to recover the artifacts that have been disturbed. The second part of the plan is to look a little bit deeper at the area and try to document the history of the area and the potential of other artifacts having been disturbed by past projects. Our construction project's on hold until we can figure out what that plan is and execute it, and it might be a long time before we're able to really complete any semblance of the construction project that we had planned.
As of right now, there was complete dialogue that's going back and forth with the band itself and MnDOT, our conservation department and natural resource department. Very well versed. They're on target. Minnesota Indian Affairs Council is in charge of it. The dialogue has been very educating on both sides of it and very progressive. The dialogue hasn't stopped at all.
But we're going to move forward and do everything we can in the right way. It has to be done. But everyone has come together. One thing I do want to point out is that this is not archaeology. This is going to be a burial recovery. So it's different. This is not doing formal excavations and you're looking for artifacts and looking for the history of a people or trying to understand the story that they represent. We have parts that we have the oral history of who they are, where they're from, who they are. But what is the story we're going to tell forward? What is the story we're going to bring back to the community and say, why did this happen? This is the story of the Fond du Lac Band, and this story has to be told for their future generations.
Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in the U.S. and worldwide. Heart attack, or myocardial infarction, or sometimes just called MI, means that some portion of the heart muscle has died. The heart pumps blood to your entire body, but it also pumps blood to itself. There is a system of blood vessels supplying blood flow to your heart, and there are three main arteries with multiple smaller branches. Coronary artery plaques build up over years and years, and they have a soft, cheesy lining with a harder shell over them. These plaques narrow the arteries, but there's still blood flow through them, and they often don't cause a problem. What happens with a heart attack is that plaque ruptures and a clot or thrombosis forms there and blocks the artery completely. This means there is no blood flow beyond the blockage, and that part of the heart muscle starts to necrose or die. The ischemia, or lack of blood flow, starts to happen in about a minute, and at this point is reversible. The death of the heart muscle happens in about 20 to 40 minutes, and once the heart muscle dies, it's gone forever. There are three layers to the heart muscle, and the inner layer is the first to die as it's the farthest from the arteries on the surface. If a heart attack goes on long enough, it can damage the entire thickness of the heart wall. The pain from a heart attack is often described as crushing or squeezing and may radiate to the left arm, shoulder, back, or jaw. Other symptoms are diaphoresis or sweating, nausea, fatigue, or shortness of breath. Driving yourself or having someone else drive you to the hospital when you're having a heart attack is a bad idea. Calling 911 will get trained emergency responders there, and they can often get a heart tracing or EKG done right away and can give oxygen, nitroglycerin, aspirin, and other medicines as needed. There are many heart centers that will take a patient directly from the ambulance into the cardiac catheterization lab where they can do angiography and stenting if needed and bypass the emergency department completely. Thrombolytics or clot-busting medications can be given if cardiac catheterization is not available. One of the things that can happen after a heart attack are arrhythmias or abnormal heart rhythms. These happen due to disrupted signals in the heart muscle due to damage. There are other complications that can happen after a heart attack, and it takes several weeks for the heart muscle to start scarring where the heart attack happened. This tissue will not ever pump again, and the rest of the heart muscle must work harder, and this can lead to heart failure. Prevention is the best intervention for heart attacks, and the risk for heart attacks that can be changed are an inactive lifestyle, high blood pressure, obesity, high cholesterol, and non-traditional tobacco use. Smoking is a huge risk factor for heart disease, and quitting is important. If you have diabetes, getting it under control will make a difference. We want you to have healthy lives and stay around for your grandchildren. Remember to call an elder. They've been waiting for your call. I'm Dr. Arnie Vineo, and this is Health Matters.
On August 8, 2013, Minnesota Governor Dayton signed an executive order affirming the government-to-government relationship between the state and the 11 Native nations within its borders. The Tribal State Relations Training Program is a direct result of that order, and its intent is to foster authentic and respectful relationships between the state agencies and the Native nations.
100 state and tribal government employees attended a tribal state relations training session on the Bois Forte Reservation. Trainees gained valuable insight into tribal issues they may not otherwise have known about were it not for this training.
The collaboration has worked with over 1,800 state employees. It's a collaborative effort between the University of Minnesota Duluth's Continuing Education Unit and the Department of American Indian Studies at UMD, and also the state of Minnesota, primarily through the Department of Transportation. We have a diverse audience. A lot of folks who do the training don't have much experience learning about working with tribes, learning about the history and the impact of the history on the present. So we try to, all at the same time, we try to do the big picture overview, the long spread of history of relationships between states and tribes and the federal government and tribes. But at the same time, we like to drill down into specificities to think about how this information can impact, can prepare state employees on a day-to-day basis to do the work that they do in a good way.
I started with MnDOT back in 2001. And I was the first tribal liaison, and I just over the years I just saw the great need for us to educate on tribal issues in a more comprehensive way. There's so many issues that could go wrong, and a few that have gone wrong, and it's good business, really, on the state of Minnesota to do this. When we work with the tribes and we communicate up front and we develop those relationships, those are bonds that we need to do as a state. And one of the problems that we have nationwide is that people are not taught about Indian history, not taught about the boarding schools, not taught about relocation, not taught about the treaties, and so that's what we're doing.
Now in its fifth year, 9 of the 11 tribes in Minnesota have hosted the training sessions. This educational experience is valued by participants and is a rewarding collaboration between the state, the university, and the Native nations of Minnesota.
Working with tribes is unique, and that this type of training allows the state employees to get a better understanding of who we are, where we've been, and where we're at today. Well, I think it's extremely important that they come to the reservation, because it's easy to sit at a desk, which many of us do, and say, oh, there's Bois Forte, for example, and Bois Forte is located way in rural northern Minnesota, rurally isolated, and I think they have a better understanding of our programs and service needs once they understand the area that we are living in and sometimes the barriers that we face with regards to services for our people.
These type of trainings need to happen every year, whether it's quarterly or twice a year or what have you, but they have to happen. I look at probably the highlight of this was, for me, it was treaties. So those are things we're working on right now with the governor's office on identifying the various treaties we have with our tribes. And I thought, you know, what a good time for me to come out and listen, learn new things, look at some policies that the state of Minnesota has done, the governor has done, and learn some new ideas and hopefully bring them back and share those with our governor, Governor Burgum, and our cabinet members in the state of North Dakota.
Well, what I'm doing is answering questions for the people that what they might have. And a lot of it has been, you know, how do they approach a Native American, a spiritual person. Then we talked also about what's the difference between Ojibwe and Anishinaabe. And I alluded to them that Ojibwe is our language and Anishinaabe is who we are as a tribe. So there was a few things that we covered. I just really thank Governor Dayton for doing this, to have more interaction among our people. I think it's time that we put that wall down and start to interact with one another as a people.
I believe there's a lot of misconceptions out there with regards to Indian people, and this is one great step in educating both ourselves and themselves with the tribes. The impact that this training has on them from day one to current is very, very extremely important for them to understand us.
So how important is it for our young people to know the ways of the old people, I guess?
It's very important because without it, without that knowledge and wisdom, you get caught up in a lifestyle that's not our lifestyle, and that's subject to using alcohol and drugs. So if they know their ways that's been given to us, that's been handed down to us, and then they'll have a good life, so. And I know it's really hard out there because there's not that many elders that are been here, long enough to share those, but with the ones that have. And then, so that's why I like working with our youth and culture programs and helping out that way. Do pipe ceremonies, run sweat lodges. I work with the Gukumis in Dal up in Lac de Flambeau, and I'm going out there to help teach ribbon shirts and skirts for the women. So.
Robert Sonny Peacock is a former tribal chairman for the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. He is also a military veteran who served in the Vietnam War. We recently sat down with Sonny, who discussed his experiences in country as a corpsman.
Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College is half a world away from the country of Vietnam. The connection between the two is Robert Sonny Peacock, who served during the Vietnam War. It is from his campus office space where he remembers and shares details about his Vietnam experience.
Yeah, my father came from Red Cliff, and my mother was Fond du Lac. And so my father was in World War II in Korea. So during those years, we really spent more time here than we did at Red Cliff. Went to school here, got in trouble here, had an option to go into the service or go to jail from here. Went in the service, and so the judge told me not to come back till I turned 21 or never. It was a choice. I could choose to be at St. Cloud until I was 21 or in the military until I was 21. So I went on down to Duluth, and it was around noontime. I'd hitchhiked down, and I walked through where they had the recruiters down there in the federal building, and the only one that had stuck around that day was an individual that was represented in the United States Navy. And I was only 17. So I went to medical school in California, trained at Balboa. And from there, as it was coming on to graduation from medical school, corps school they called it. I said, I don't want to be stationed in a hospital. I said, I'd rather go aboard ship or some other kind of duty, you know. And the chief at the time said, well, how about, you know, FMF, which is Fleet Marine Force? And I said, what's that? And he said, well, you'd go through more training, field medical, in combat training, and then from there we'd assign you with the United States Marine Corps. And when we got into Vietnam, the temperature was 100 plus and the humidity was close to 100. So not only did they have to fight an unseen enemy when we first got there, the weather, the conditions were just as bad.
Sonny asserted that while he and his fellow soldiers were highly trained, they were not ready for a jungle war or guerrilla warfare.
The Viet Cong moved with just a pajama-like outfit, straw hat, flip-flops, an AK-47 and a handful of ammo and a sack of rice they'd boil up when they got a chance to stop, and they'd drink whatever water was available. We were trudging through there with full field packs, making noise, had clinking and making sounds like you couldn't believe. And it was like you could hear us coming. We didn't have the experience or knowledge at that level to be able to take advantage of how to fight the enemy. But the thing is, what saved us on a number of occasions was the fact that we had firepower. We had air support, we had naval gunfire, we had mortars, we had artillery, because our own thinking at times would get us in trouble. You have to remember, these people had been fighting for a long, long time.
This was a war that was much different than the ones before it. The one constant was death and destruction, and Sonny had seen both during his time in country.
When North Vietnamese came in, they had the organization, but they were having to learn the territory as much as we were. And so, but they had knowledge of caves and tunnel system like you can't believe. Just unbelievable. We discovered one right after Starlight in an operation called Piranha. We wanted to get in there and see what the hell was in the tunnels before we got pushed and had to go back out on point. And so they took a squad down early, and they got overcome down there because when we blew it, it blew out the oxygen, air, and everything. So the concussion, if the concussion didn't kill the Viet Cong, the lack of oxygen killed them. And it killed a couple of our guys too. But I'm literally walking on dead bodies that are squishing and moving and making noises, and I can't see a damn thing. I'm looking for Marines that are unconscious, and I'm trying to drag them out, and the temperature is awful, the stench is horrible. I went back in the second time, and I found a friend of mine in there. He was a part of the squad that went down. And I had to make a choice between him and the officer that was in there. I don't think I drug him more than maybe 20, 30 feet. And then I started to go out. The individual I pulled out, or tried to, first one was fine. The second one ultimately had so much brain damage that he never recovered. The officer I left there was dead there. You know, he was pronounced when they got him back to the ship. I'm still claustrophobic because of that experience.
These experiences have shaped Sonny's opinions about the war, and he questions if the ends justify the means, especially when he can draw a parallel between what happened in Vietnam and the United States treatment of Native Americans.
We were headquartered out of a beat-up old French house, sort of a village or something, with the roof was half gone. It was all, and it was raining. It had been raining and raining and raining. And I'm sitting there trying to find a dry cigarette to light up, and I'm watching the rain come down and wash these bodies, wash the blood off the bodies. And they were just pale. And I'm starting to wonder about who's winning and why are we here? And what's the sense of it? Because I'm seeing a government in Saigon that really doesn't represent these people. And we just kept pouring equipment and people, and it just kept sucking it all up. When we make war against another place for whatever reason and we find out that there's something wrong with us for doing it, we should man up. And we should make it right. When I came home from Vietnam and came back to the res, I had left a place that was didn't have really much of a future. And when I got home, it still didn't have much of a future. I mean, it was like time stood still. We were still being treated, you know, in that same manner. The first thing the United States could do is to man up to the situation, condition of the American Indian.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, look for us on the web at nativereport.org and on Facebook.
Thank you for spending this time with your friends and neighbors across Indian country. I'm Rita Aspinwall.
And I'm Ernie Stevens. Join us next time for Native Report.
Rita Aspinwall is an enrolled member of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and is an ICWA social worker with Fond du Lac Social Services. Ernie Stevens is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and is a film and television producer. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Blandin Foundation, and the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation.